Right, I think we've... Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the third webinar in the Inspirational Alumni webinar series. I'm delighted this afternoon that I've got Imam Monawar Hussain speaking today with Professor Bill Gibson from Oxford Brookes. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
So Imam Monawar Hussain is the first ever Imam at Eton College in Windsor, and he's also an Imam at the Oxford University Hospital Trust in Oxford. He's also a founder of the Oxford Foundation, which supports integration and diversity in Oxfordshire population, which we'll hear more about later in the webinar. He's also an alumnus of Oxford Brookes and from the Humanities and Faculty in Harcourt Hill. So welcome. The webinar this afternoon is going to be recorded, and it's also going to be around 45 minutes. If you'd like to put questions in the chat at the bottom or the question Q&A section, we'll pick a few of them up along the way as relevant, but we will have 10 minutes at the end to address further questions. So I'm delighted to hand over to Professor Gibson, and I hope you have an interesting conversation.
Great, thanks very much, Molly. That's lovely, and welcome, Monawar. It's good to see you. What I'd like to do first of all, and I think many people the webinar would be interested in, is to begin by talking about your role as High Sheriff of Oxfordshire, because it's a role which I don't think many people perhaps understand. And then once we've discussed what the role of the High Sheriff is, perhaps to rewind back to your immediate Brookes experiences and plot your course from Brookes' recent graduate through to becoming an Imam and High Sheriff of Oxfordshire. So let's begin with the role of High Sheriff. I think probably people like me think, well, the royal representative in each county is the Lord Lieutenant. So what exactly is the High Sheriff? What is the role of High Sheriff, Monawar?
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Bill. It's great to be with you. And thank you also, Molly, for setting this up. And hello to the audience. Good evening, everyone. Well, the High Sheriff, the office of the High Sheriff is the second oldest to the monarchy. And it's been going for over 1,000 years. And I suppose to summarize in terms of what are the objectives of the High Sheriff. Well, firstly, of course, it's to lend support to the principal organs of the Constitution within the county. So the royal family, the judiciary, the police, and other law enforcement agencies, the emergency services, local authorities, and church and faith groups. And by the way, talking about the police, I actually had spent about 8.5 hours from 5 o'clock Saturday to about 2 o'clock Sunday morning. And it was so insightful. And I want to say a big thank you to the Thames Valley Police for kind of facilitating that. So that's one of the roles of the High Sheriff, really, is to support those organs of the Constitution. But it's also to support voluntary sector and give all possible encouragement to the voluntary organisations within the county, and particularly those involved with crime reduction and social cohesion. And the welfare of visiting High Court judges. I've had the great privilege of hosting 2 High Court judges, and also hosting the local judiciary. So, for example, on Sunday, just last Sunday gone, I had tree planting, and so I wanted to make sure, as it's probably my last big sort of function, I invited all the magistrates and the judiciary, the police, various charities, and whoever could come came. And it was my opportunity really to say thank you very much for all that they do in their various roles in our county. And I suppose it's also to try and make sure that the role itself, the office itself, remains relevant to the county, and it actually has impact and makes a positive contribution to the county. And finally, you mentioned the Lord Lieutenants. Yesterday, I had the great honour of, with the Deputy Lieutenant, welcoming Her Royal Highness Princess Anne. So I've, had the occasion to welcome some royals to our county, and that's also a great privilege because it enables us to enter into a world where we learn and hear about the good work that goes on in the county and the country. So yesterday was the Butler Trust. I think they have 60 recipients of various awards in terms of their contribution to the prison service. So that was really inspiring to see to hear the citations of their dedication, their commitment to the prison service. So that's one example of what we've recently done. The other thing, Bill, if I continue on that theme of the High Sheriff, we have the High Sheriffs Association in England and Wales, and they kind of offer seminars. And so one of the things I learned from my own seminar was that be yourself, that one is selected to this office. There's a panel, and so one can submit different names, and that panel sifts through the applicants. But the whole point is that you've been appointed for who you are and the skills that you bring to the role. So for me, a number of things came out for being myself. One of the first things I did was to appoint 7 chaplains. Now, most high sheriffs have 1 chaplain, but I wanted to be myself. Myself is to be as inclusive as I can be, and to ensure also that the 7 chaplains representing 7 different faiths in our county also demonstrates the inclusivity of my office. So it draws in and recognizes other diverse communities. And I think that's the first time in 1,000+ years that happened. The other theme, every high sheriff has a theme for the year. So we have 3 years in advance to kind of plan for our year. But of course, the pandemic hit. And I was left thinking, what am I going to do in terms of my theme? And really my inspiration was with my sort of chaplaincy hat on with the Oxford University Hospitals. It was colleagues there, caring for patients with COVID with great compassion, professionalism, and dignity. And I thought, something, it's a great honor for me to be High Sheriff, and I'm going to try and celebrate these unsung heroes that we have in our county. And so my theme for my year began with celebrating Oxfordshire's COVID-19 heroes. And then it also translated into, once I'd celebrated COVID heroes, was climate action. And then yesterday at the Oxford Synagogue, I had the great honor really of thanking people involved in interfaith work in the county, and also giving awards to the Oxford Council of Faiths and also Oxford Interfaith Friendship Walk. So that's a little bit about so far what I've done, and I hope it gives people a sense of what the High Sheriff does.
Well, Monawar, I'm sure we'll come back to interfaith conversations later on, but just before we leave the High Sheriff, of course, one of the historic things about the High Sheriff is that the nomination process is technically called the pricking of the name of the High Sheriff, isn't it? So your name is pricked out by the Queen with a needle in the Privy Council, I think. Presumably you're not present when your name is pricked in that way, are you?
No. Thank you for raising that, Bill. Well, every year, once you're appointed as a High Sheriff in nomination for 3 years. The Lord Justices in the High Court read out the names of all the High Sheriffs in England and Wales who will be taking office. So that's quite a ceremony in its own right. And then in your final year, just before your appointment, Her Majesty pricks your name. So mine was pricked in at Windsor Castle, and that's officially the moment that you kind of now know that you will be the High Sheriff. Prior to that, you're always High Sheriff in waiting or High Sheriff in nomination. Yes. So you're making all sorts of plans, but you just don't quite know until your name's pricked.
Yes. The other thing about the High Sheriff, which I vaguely remember from my British Constitution O-level, is that technically the High Sheriff of each county is the election returning officer, which is why at elections, all of the returning officers refer to themselves as the deputy returning officer, because actually they're deputising for the High Sheriff. But presumably, High Sheriffs these days don't actually actively play a part as returning officers in elections, do they, Monawar?
They do. Actually, my counterpart in Buckinghamshire did so at the last election. I think it was a by-election. Sir George Anson was a returning officer. So you have that option, that choice.
Gosh, okay. One that you haven't had the opportunity to exercise, I assume.
No, not yet. But my year ends end of this month, so
anything can happen.
Returning officer for me.
Okay. Now, Monawar, what I want to do now is to just rewind to the start of your journey, so to speak, and the process of getting from being a Brookes graduate. Now, strictly, although we're referring to you as a Brookes graduate, you were a graduate of one of Brookes's predecessor institutions, weren't you? Westminster College, which joined Oxford Brookes, merged with Oxford Brookes in 2000. Can you tell us why you decided to go to Westminster College and what your experiences there were like?
Yeah, I've been a perpetual student. I've just been studying all the time. And I remember I think it's Friday or one evening anyway, my father said to me that there was an announcement at Friday prayers that Westminster College were holding a kind of seminar or some event at the Asian Cultural Centre. I still remember this so many years later. And so I went down and met Dr. Stephen Bigger. Stephen sort of told me about the theology degree, and I'd always been interested in things spiritual, things about faith and different religious traditions. So I already had that interest. And if I'm honest with you, I was feeling in no man's land for about 2-3 years. I'd started my own business in 1988, and I just found that for 2 years I just didn't know where I was heading. And that's the moment when I met Steve in that Asian Cultural Centre. And then I had an interview with Rob Fisher, Dr. Rob Fisher. I don't know whether anyone on here remembers him, but he was the head of philosophy there. And I fortunately got in, and I had the most wonderful time at Westminster College. And during that time, while studying, I was also running my petrol station. Which was at Clifton Hampden. So my customers would come in, I'd serve them, and then open up my books again, which were under the counter. But I had a wonderful time, made long-lasting friendships from Westminster College, and I owe a great debt of gratitude really to Westminster College, and also all our tutors there. They were wonderful people. And very inspiring. So I had it was a tremendous, and actually it was towards the in my first year, sadly, my mother had a stroke, and that really was a life-changing event for me. I almost gave up because I was looking after my mum in hospital, staying overnight with her, and so I wrote him just to say, I don't think I can continue. And I was encouraged to continue. And thankfully, just before the next term began, my mother sort of began to improve, but she was severely disabled. And so I was able to continue with my studies. And it was during my final year, when I majored in Islam and the West, it was Dr. Clinton Bennett, because by then I had formed the idea that I was going to train as an Imam. And most people that I knew were going abroad, but it was Dr. Clinton Bennett who said to me, go and meet Sheikh Dr. Zaki Badawi in London. He's passed away now, but he was one of the founding members of the Three Faiths Forum. He was just very knowledgeable, but also a very wise man. And, it's one thing having being knowledgeable and so on, but it's another to actually have the combination of both.
Yes.
And a very, very humble man, very humble man. And so that really was a life changer for me, meeting him. So I didn't have to go abroad. I could just go to Ealing, where the Muslim college was. And so I could run the business and also continue to study.
And Monawar, in terms of Westminster College in those days, although it had clearly a sort of world religions element, it was nevertheless clearly a Methodist foundation, and it was emphatically Christian. How comfortable did you feel as a young Islamic student or a Muslim student in that environment?
I remember warmth. I remember a really lovely atmosphere of a community, of being part of something and not being an outsider. And that's really left a great imprint upon me, because we, as I say, I made some lovely friends during that time, and some of the teachers, I say, Dr. Clinton Bennett is my Facebook friend. The other day I was at dinner in one of the colleges, the Centre for Islamic Studies, and I met Dr. Peggy Morgan.
Yes.
So I have huge admiration for her and still keep in touch. But the point is that it was a formative time for me, where one can be rigorous in terms of one's academic work, but nonetheless still feel that one is part of a community, and people were very respectful. So we had some really tough discussions, but once you came out of the class, you were still friends. And it wasn't, but it was a wonderful example of tolerance and respectfulness, but also disagreeing in a civil way and still being friends.
Disagreeing agreeably, I guess.
Yes.
Monawar, one of the things that I think is very clear as a sort of thread that runs through from your time at Westminster and later is this kind of sense that the Abrahamic religions, which, for our guests include obviously Judaism and Islam and Christianity, are kind of brother or sister religions. But also that kind of spreads out beyond just the Abrahamic religions as well. Now, you went on from Westminster to London University to study for an MA in the Abrahamic religions. How much experience did you have of religion beyond those three great Abrahamic religions?
Yeah, I think, again, Westminster College was formative in the sense that we had world religions. So we did study world religions there, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism. And so and of course, I was given the opportunity to major in Islam in the West, which, looking back, I think was just a brilliant formation for me, because when I went on to train as an Imam, by then 9/11 had happened, and so having a sense of that long history was very, very, very helpful. And so, but of course, when I went to study the MA in Abrahamic religions, that was really through a deep interest in trying to find a common ground. I know that religious traditions have differences, but fundamentally it's about human transformation. Each religion, each religious tradition is about human transformation. It's about human flourishing. And how can we rise above the kind of the differences which exist, but the common ground? How can we find that? So when I was looking at St. Thomas Aquinas and Al-Ghazali, it was virtue. It was trying to, how do we live a good life? And so I already kind of had those roots. So going on to the MA Abrahamic religions, I thought, I'd been invited to be part of a project on the Fairy Queen. And I thought, the more I read that, the more I thought it was a deep spiritual book. And so I decided to write my dissertation on a comparative study of the first book of Holiness of the Fairy Queen, and a great Persian work by Friduddin Attar, which is a Conference of the Birds, sort of a Christian and a Muslim journey to holiness. And so I found again, yes, there are differences, but trying to find a common ground between the two, because ultimately I really passionately believe that faith and religion should be a source of goodness in society, a powerful force for human flourishing, and not division, not violence, and not hatred.
Yes, it certainly seems to me that the kind of emphasis, particularly from 9/11, has been on divisions and separateness, whereas actually viewing the Abrahamic religions as a trio, as a family of religions, and emphasizing the sort of sharedness is a really important element in human society, and something I think sometimes we easily lose track of. Can I also now move on to your training as an Imam, and could you tell us a little bit about what the training of an Imam is and how the Imam operates?
Yeah, no, thank you. As I said, I was very fortunate to meet Sheikh Zaki Badawi. He was a pioneer in terms of interfaith relations, and he was a co-founder of the Three Faiths Forum, and was associated with various different initiatives. And so he'd set up the Muslim College in London to train Muslims for the Western context, for modern Britain, but also for Europe. So Muslims who were familiar and who lived in a multicultural society, a modern sort of secular democratic society, and kind of had the course and the training to prepare us for this modern world. And I think he really led by example. He was a very humble man with great wisdom. And so there was a core element which was around subjects of the law, the Islamic law, Islamic theology, Islamic history. He also invited leaders from other faiths to come and speak with us. So, you'd have, he said, I'm not going to teach you other religions. I'm not going to teach you Judaism or Christianity. I'm going to get people who live and breathe those traditions to come and speak with you. So it was, I think, Rabbi David Goldberg who taught us Judaism, and Michael Barnes, I think, from Haythorpe College. So he taught us Christianity, and we had various other Sikh and Hindu leaders. So that's a kind of training. And then on top of that, we visited prisons, we visited healthcare settings. We had people come in to speak with us about, being an imam or a chaplain within a healthcare setting, within prison, and within the community. So his kind of vision for an imam was so different from an imam just being confined to the mosque. It was about being in the mosque, but also being outside and building bridges and relationships and building a real sense of community out there.
And after your Imam training, you clearly practiced as an imam, and amongst other locations have been imam to Eton College. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, it was incredible. So I was at the Muslim College for 4 years, and in my final year, Dr. Badawi in the class said that Eton College were looking for a Muslim tutor, and so he said, you should apply, and so I applied. A number of others applied. I think they had about 20 applications. I think, but I really went for an interview, and for me it just seemed to be the natural progression from having studied and traveled to London, 4 times a week for 4 years, and it just seemed to be a natural progression to the next step, which was Eton College. But I hadn't really done much background kind of research into Eton. I went and met the head of divinity, Michael Wilkinson, a really lovely, really great academic in terms of faiths. So I met him, we had coffee, and then I got this wonderful letter to say, would you accept this position? And I did. And then it wasn't until one day, after having done a 13, 14-hour shift at my petrol station, because I was still running the business at Clifton Hampton, I came home and the phone rang. And so I said to my wife, no, don't worry, let's just enjoy our supper, and then I'll answer the phone. And it turned out that by then my father had come around as well, and he just said, what have you done? And I said, well, I've been at work all day. I've not done anything. And Dad said, well, lots of newspaper people are ringing me up. And I thought, I best go and check my phone then. So I checked my phone, and it was the editor of the Sunday Telegraph saying, what do you have to say about the story on the front page of Sunday Times that you've been appointed an imam at Eton College? And the next day, I mean, it was just all of the different media outlets were calling me, wanting to interview me, and I'd had no experience at all. And thankfully, Michael Wilkinson, who was the head of divinity, very kindly took that on, and so that's how the news broke. And then the following week, the Sunday Times did a 2-page spread on me, and so all my customers are coming in saying, "Is that you in the Sunday Times?" You couldn't make this up, could you?
And in terms of your role at Eton, tell us a little bit about that, because I think most of us have a view of Eton, which is that it's steeped in privilege and enormous advantage. And I guess in some respects, it seems to me that it's likely that very few Etonians have much experience of Islam.
Yeah, I mean, Eton, I must say, it's been an absolutely wonderful and amazing place, and it's a real privilege and honor to be part of Eton. And I say that just as an example. Just very recently, I think last week, the headmaster announced that Eton, with Star Academies, will be setting up 3 sixth form colleges, one in Oldham, one in Peterborough. So Oldham, Peterborough, there's one other place, but it's in the north,
Yeah.
And very much building partnerships to deliver that excellence, that model of Eton teaching in other places. But Eton, in terms of my own role, so every Sunday we have a faith class or faith classes. So when I started, there was the Jewish tutor and myself. And then the Hindu tutor was added, then Buddhist tutor, a Sikh tutor, and a Sikh tutor I think will be added, but a humanist tutor. So all of these different faith traditions meet up in their own classes so that young Etonians can grow up with a understanding and an experience of having taken faith seriously. So they meet up in their own classes. Then we also do an assembly So, one does an assembly and introduces an aspect of Islam, for example, or if it's a Hindu tutor or Buddhist, they'll introduce an aspect of their own traditions to the boys. And then in addition to that, we have what's called Eton Faiths Forum, which brings together the different faith traditions in one space, and you take a theme and you have a discussion about that. The other thing I think people listening will not know about Eton is that it has scholarship programs. So when I started, I had 8 boys in my class. Now we have over 30. And a number of them are on scholarships from who come from inner city environments. I remember one young man, he was Pakistani origin. I think he got straight 8 A's at GCSE, and his mother wrote into our headmaster at the time, I think Mr. Tony Little, and said, look, my son is really talented, but we can't afford to send him to Eton. So headmaster said, look, come over. So the headmaster met him and he got a scholarship for 2 years, and he is now a qualified GP. But there are so many other stories like that, which, again, when you look at the media, you just wouldn't hear any of these positive stories. But that's the model of Eton. I think its excellence lies in education, and through that education, it transforms lives. And the vision, I think, that the headmaster really is to ensure that any young, talented boy would be given a bursary, and money should not disqualify them from having a really high quality education, and hence, partnerships with academies, whether in the north, whether in London, Holyport, which is not very far from Eton. So lots of really good news going on, and a great vision. Just having faith tutors. How many schools have faith tutors?
Yes.
That's a great vision, I think, for the future, because if we're preparing future leaders who understand different faiths and perspectives, I think they're in a better position to serve in the wider world, which is interconnected, and one in which faith still does remain quite an important factor in many other countries.
Thanks, Monawar. Before we move away from interfaith things and move on to your involvement in community organisations and charities, one last question about interfaith kind of conversations and interaction is, can you tell us what you see as the sort of stumbling blocks to greater unity between religious groups? Because it seems to me that there's an awful lot of goodwill and positive relations between faith groups, but nevertheless there are still some stumbling blocks which prevent closer relationships, and it would be very interesting to know what your view of those was.
In my experience, I've found that people often don't know someone from another faith, or have a sense of not offending people and not asking questions. And I think that's where the Oxford Council of Faiths, for example, has what they call a dating evening, where a group of people come in, so each one will introduce for 5 minutes or 3 minutes, their own religious tradition to another person of another faith, and likewise they'll just move around the room. But I think fundamentally at the heart of this, I think, is the lack of interaction between people. And so what I've tried to do through my work is create those spaces where people do meet from different faiths. So United for Peace is one of those initiatives where I bring together people of many different faiths or of no faith to share prayer, silence, reflective pieces, to share some music or singing from their own traditions. So try and mix a sense of beauty that emanates from each of the traditions. And when it comes together in that diversity, people walk away thinking, wow, we've never experienced this before, and I do believe in religious integrity, that each person follows their path and they have something beautiful to offer, and therefore create a space where they can share that. So you are right. I think the ignorance, the lack of understanding really comes through, I think, lack of interaction. And so we need to ensure we create safe spaces, where, in the county or wherever we are, try and create a space where people can come together, feel respected, feel comfortable and secure and safe, and be able to meet other people of different traditions, and to take something that really appeals to them all. It's easy to take a divisive, kind of some kind of political issue. But really, the fact is that what we have to do is build relationships before we can talk about the really difficult issues or challenging issues.
Yes, that's a very interesting point, that the sort of conversations and relationships are precursors to deeper conversations. And I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, trust is so important.
Yeah. Can we move on now to another theme in your life, which I think has been fascinating, which is your involvement with the NHS. And the NHS, I think, is probably just one of a number of public organisations, public sector organisations that you've had really close relations with. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what attracts you so much to the NHS and the public sector, and the way in which you see it connecting up with other public services.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I think for about 7 or 8 years, I was a volunteer and for the trust here. And I would get a phone call and I'd drop everything and just go. And it was end of life. It was someone who's about to pass away. So just go and offer some prayers and support to the family. And then this opportunity of becoming a Muslim chaplain to the trust came up. And the most wonderful and amazing thing, and the most valuable thing that we can do, is to serve. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that the best of you is the one who serves others. And so service, hidmah, we call it hidmah, is just so important. And so the hospital work and what the NHS does, it serves all our population, irrespective of, background, income, economic background, whoever it is, they will get the very best treatment. And that's what's, as I said earlier, that's what inspired me. And I've seen it firsthand, what colleagues do, and they do so selflessly. They don't want any recognition. And they do so in a really difficult environment. The last 2-3 years, the last 2 years have been very, very difficult, having to deal with so much bereavement, having to wear the PPE, for those 12-hour shifts. It's just, one can only but praise those colleagues who do that. And I include within that not just clinicians, but and nurses, but also the porters and the cleaners. Every single person has to come in, do that bit to be able to deliver the very best service and care that they can give. And so that's what's really inspiring for me, is to be part of an organization that delivers such care with so much compassion and also professionalism. And I know during the pandemic, one of the challenges was, how do we get our message across to our diverse communities around vaccinations? And so one of the things I did was, with our trust media colleagues and the NHS, we worked out a text. So I got in touch with faith leaders in the city, and I said, look, can you please record this message in your own languages, because we'd like to try and get that message out. And
Yes.
that's what we did. But I found in my life really collaboration and partnership brings so many positive impacts and results. And I found that, I've been able to achieve so much through collaboration and partnership. And the NHS is about that. It collaborates with, the clinical commissioning group, social care people. There's a lot of partnership going on to deliver the care and for our citizens in our county and the country.
One of the things that I'm always reminded of is J.B. Priestley, the playwright, who talked about Britain in the Second World War, and he said Britain was never better than during the Second World War because people were prepared to help. And it strikes me that there is something about adversity which brings out, in some ways, the sort of comments that you were making about sharedness in the human spirit, that instinctively people are willing to help one another when they witness and see adversity. And it seems to me that that's what you're kind of describing, really, is that kind of humanity in the face of adversity. And I think we've probably seen that a good deal in the last 2 or 3 years.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what's been inspiring, is that, people at the most difficult time and the most challenging time in modern history, communities and individuals came together selflessly, looked after the vulnerable in their communities. That's just amazing. And that's one of the, you're so right. It was such a difficult time. And yet so many food banks, so many coordinated, collaborative efforts to serve the vulnerable in our county and country emerged. So out of a very difficult situation, a new sense of community emerged.
And one of the aspects of your kind of charitable work, it seems to me, is that however kind of mean-spirited people can sometimes be, and however there is a sense of cynicism, actually when people are asked directly for help, very few people in my experience ever say no. By and large, people will always respond if they're directly asked for help. And it seems to me that that's one of the facets that lies behind quite a lot of your charitable activity. And in the last few minutes of our conversation, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about the other charities that you're involved with that perhaps don't get as much airtime and coverage as the NHS and interfaith work.
Sure. Oxfordshire Community Foundation, I think, does a fabulous work in the county. I am now on their board. I think they are an inspiration to the whole county in terms of, taking being an outlet, a conduit, really, for big donors, big sponsors who say, right, we want to support this kind of endeavor. We want to support this group of vulnerable people or community and so on. And so what Oxfordshire Community Foundation does, because they have that local expertise and knowledge, is they deliver that. The other, the Prison Phoenix Trust, they provide meditation, yoga in prison. And so prisoners often, are going through a difficult time. There's anger, there's anxiety, there are all sorts of things going on. And so they begin to focus on their breath. When they begin to meditate, they find they find their own center. It gives them calmness and a sense of tranquility and a sense of centeredness, which they didn't have before. So the Prison Phoenix Trust also, I think, is a tremendous charity. I mean, that there's also the Dalai Lama Center for Compassion. We can all, and that really resonates with me because the Islamic tradition, it has one of the core aspects is sound, which is doing the beautiful, making everything that we do beautiful. And part of that beauty is compassion, is mercy, is about trying to create an inner beauty that actually leads out into beauty in terms of our actions and how we live out in the world. So they're also a very inspiring group. There are quite a few boards that charities that I support, but they're just a few that I think are just very inspirational.
Okay, Monawar. Lastly, before we wrap up, one final question about what happens to retired high sheriffs of counties. What's next on your agenda for 2023, 4, 5, and beyond? What have you left to do?
Oh, there is so much to do. But right now, when my year concludes on the 31st of March, I'm going to have a rest.
Good.
Just have a break, have some rest, and then see what emerges. But I'm a great believer in sort of things opening up and people coming to me, and so. But
Yes.
But right now, have a break and have some time with family.
I suspect that you may well have a huge number of people beating a path to your door because I think you've had a very, very successful year as High Sheriff, and you're to be congratulated on the connections you've made. And I think in particular that earlier conversation about bringing people together is very much what your High Sheriffdom or your sheriffship will be remembered for. So many congratulations on that. And let's hand back to Molly so that we can take any questions that that people have got.
Thank you, Bill.
Hello.
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Okay, can you see me?
Yes, we can see you as well.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent. That was very interesting. I've a few burning questions that I had for you that were answered as well. And Monawar, that was brilliant to hear more about your life and your journey as the High Sheriff. Particularly was interesting for me. We've got 5-10 minutes to ask any burning questions from the audience. If you've got anything you'd like to ask, now is the time. If you'd like to pop it in the Q&A tab at the bottom or in the chat. And
while people are doing that, can I just ask one question, which I didn't get an opportunity to ask Monawar, which is in terms of running a business as well as doing all these other roles, both education and as an Imam and as a tutor and chaplain and High Sheriff. How did you manage it? I mean, this is plate spinning at its most extreme, I'd have thought, isn't it?
Yeah, you've really touched on something really quite challenging for my year, and that's admin. So I've been very fortunate. I've had my daughter sort of supporting me, with the social media, and one of my eldest is supporting me with the admin. But it really is a juggling act, that. And that's been the hardest part, actually, the admin side, because I have to work, and I have, been very fortunate with the Oxfordshire, with the hospital, the Oxford University Hospital Trust.
Yeah.
They've been very supportive in terms of my voluntary work, but no, it's very challenging, and admin is a tough. I'm up till 12 or even 2 in the morning, just
well, you've pulled it off, Monawar. So there are a couple of questions that have come in. Martin Flatman asks, where are you normally for Friday prayers?
Yeah, I'm on Fridays. I take my father, who's almost 90, to the Central Mosque, and I find that that's my time, as it were. But really, I feel a great sense of duty. So I take my father. That's his kind of once in a week time to actually go to the mosque, because I've been so busy through the week, I've not been able to take him now. So Fridays I spend at Central Mosque.
Right. We got a question from Amanda who says, "What's your key learning of how I can be tolerant of differences and come together for good?" What is the source of tolerance? How do we practice tolerance and pursue that?
I think live out love, and that love is for everyone around us, and look at other people not as different from us, as actually believing that we are one big human family, that there is one family. There isn't us and them. There isn't this religion, that religion. But first, we come into the world as human beings, and that's our big family. And to respect others for the differences that we might have, because I think human being means that we're going to be have different points of view from each other. What those differences should not lead to is violence and hatred and all of that kind of thing. So I think that there's a initiative called A Common Word, and it talks about two principles within Christianity and Islam and other faiths as well: the love of God and love of neighbor. So loving God, but you love your God through loving your neighbor and whoever they might be, loving the stranger. So for me, it really is about living out that love and recognizing the common humanity. And that's really important, because it's too easy for things to become divisive, that we feel empathy for every single human being on this earth.
One of the aspects of Dalai Lama's Centre for Compassion, it seems to me, is his emphasis on small actions, that small acts of kindness can be a source of creating tolerance. And it seems to me that there are in front of us starting points. I'm always struck by the old 1662 prayer book, which refers to the good works which thou hast prepared for us to walk in, as if good works are footprints in front of us that we can step into. And it strikes me that small acts of compassion are part of those footsteps that we can step into. So it doesn't, toleration doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be small acts of compassion.
Yeah.
We've also got a question from Jackie O'Brien saying, in 35 years of civic and ceremonial life in Derbyshire, in that case, high sheriffs have been people of significant personal means. Have you found it to be expensive? That's an interesting...
That's an excellent question, may I say, because that's my youngest says, Dad, you're the High Sheriff of Cowley. I think I'm the first High Sheriff in Cowley in the county, and the chivalry is trying to ensure that people from all sorts of backgrounds who've got the skills, who can be great High Sheriffs, are given the opportunity. So, for example, the High Sheriff's costume, the dress,
yes,
I mean, brand new, is about £8,000, so £8,000.
For those of you who don't know, Monawar's uniform as High Sheriff is a rather splendid black velvet number with silver buttons and a lace.
We need a photo.
Yes, we do need a photo of you in it, really. But it's a very, very splendid outfit indeed.
I share this with you because, for me, I had the dispensation that I could just wear sort of suit and my badge. But on the day of my swearing-in ceremony, a very kind soul who was just finishing his year as High Sheriff rang me up and he said, Monawar, we spoke a while back and I completely forgot. I've been really busy with my High Sheriff year, but do you still need the dress? And I said, yes, please. How much will the taxi cost? So he told me about £100 for taxi. So within an hour, I had this wonderful dress that I wear, that this very kind soul has lent to me. Now, it makes it very special when you go out dressed up in court dress. So one of the challenges is, how can we facilitate that? Because the day before, by the way, just sharing with you, the day before, one of my eldest daughters, she said, Dad, it would have been great if you had the dress. We could have taken loads of pictures and could have given it back. And I said, I'm just too embarrassed, too shy to ask again. And it's not fair. And so the next day when I got this dress, it was fabulous, but there is a cost involved. And I think the chivalry is trying to adapt and change with the time. So as I say, there was a dispensation for me. You don't have to have that, because people felt that, we need to try and make the role relevant, but also it mustn't be
something that's really expensive for people to do.
Yeah. Two other questions coming in. One from Frederick Johnson is, do you have a message for atheists? And in some ways, our conversation has been very faith-heavy, Monawar, and I wonder if what you're...
Absolutely. We're part of the same human family. You know, this is the beauty of being human beings. We choose our own paths. So believe or not believe, it's entirely up to individuals. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't love each other and get on. You know, that should never be the case. We should always love each other as fellow travelers, as fellow human beings.
Yes, I'm rather struck by the way the Queen always refers to people of all faiths and none, and in some ways emphasises thereby that there is a kind of commonality even with people who have no faith, with those who have, which I think is a nice way of putting it, really.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of questions, one from Mariam asking, she says, thank you for your talk. Throughout your experience as High Sheriff of Oxfordshire, what achievement or challenge was most impactful for you, as well as perhaps the community?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I suppose the most impactful in terms of the judiciary was the appointment of 7 chaplains. And so what I did was I made sure that when we have the legal service, which is the beginning of the legal year, I invited each one of my chaplains to say a blessing right at the end in their own languages, and then a translation in English. And so many from the judiciary and others said, well, that was amazing. And so I hope it demonstrated that when we have that richness of diversity together, that we create something very beautiful. And so, you know, when I first said I'm going to appoint 7 chaplains, people thought, well, this is going to go on for hours, you know.
Yes.
But in fact, no, I can just say to the chaplains, do a blessing for 1.5 minutes rather than half an hour, you know, and that's what we did. So I think that's been really impactful. So, and it's also recognized diversity in our county too.
It would be great if that was continued by your successor, I hope. Mm-hmm. A last question, again from Jackie, is do you have any optimism, and can you share any optimism for the situation in Ukraine, which is probably a left field question, but it's clearly a question which is worrying and concerning a lot of us at the moment. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking what we see on our screens, because in my role as a Muslim chaplain, I'm dealing with bereaved families. I have an experience what grief is, and what loss is, and we've had so much of that in the last 2 years during the pandemic. That surely that's enough, rather than us inflicting more grief and more sadness and destruction on fellow human beings. I mean, I think it's time human beings stopped war and violence, and that we begin to work and collaboratively and use diplomacy to sort out all our problems. I mean, it's heartbreaking what we see, but just imagine, we don't have swords and arrows anymore. We have such destructive weapons now that they could destroy all that human beings have built. You know, we can actually bomb ourselves to Stone Age, if not just destroy ourselves completely. So, you know, all I'd say is that violence and war is just no longer an option. We have to find ways that recognize that if there are issues, that we sit around the table and make that happen. I think United Nations as that organization that was established after the Second World War to ensure that nothing like that happened again needs to be much stronger, and only nation states can do that. But it's very, very distressing to see the suffering that human beings are going through at the moment. But Bill, within that, something like 44,000 British people have said, we will take a refugee from Ukraine. Well, you know, we were talking about the compassion that exists in people's hearts.
and that demonstrates that the darkest hour, there is so much still goodness out there. And I think we all we can do is continue in whatever way we can to say that war is not an option, that we have to find diplomacy to sort this out. It's heartbreaking to see those images. And, you know, I don't think war is anymore an option. I'm sorry, I don't have a solution to what's going on in Ukraine or Syria or Yemen and all of these different places, but it can be done. The powerful in our world said no war as a rule.
It's a reminder, isn't it, that the kind of message that you were talking about earlier on about finding commonality and a sense of community with other people lies at the heart of the human endeavour, and that we shouldn't give up.
Absolutely. We've got to keep living out beauty and love in our lives and do the very best that we can. And you mentioned that, Bill, about kindness, small kindnesses. All those drops turn into a full glass and a sea of beauty and love. And ultimately, that's what will win the day. It's not the war and the killing and the terrible destruction that's taking place.
Well, that's a great point to finish on, Monawar, and a great optimistic point to finish on. So thank you very much indeed for a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for giving up your time in a very, very busy year. So, and congratulations on your high sheriffdom, so to speak.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd like to say a big thank you as well. Thank you, and thank you, Bill, for hosting.
It's a great pleasure.
Evening. Just a quick plump to the audience that we do have another webinar on Thursday, which is Amir Habibi talking about being an entrepreneur. And he's from Afghanistan. He's a refugee from Afghanistan. So if you're interested, we'll be here at 5:00 on Thursday, this Thursday. Anyway, Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.